Thank you so much, Rich and Jeff, for allowing me to be a part of this. I'd love to share on Christology, such an important topic. I want to start off just thinking about the early days of our church plant here in Cumberland. I was doing a Bible study in a local restaurant. A young man during that Bible study said to me, with tears in his eyes and tears rolling down his face, "I just want to know God. I really just want to know God." And I want to share with this group the same thing I shared with that young man. If you want to know God, just look to Jesus. You know, Hebrews chapter 1 says that he's the exact representation of the Father. Colossians tells us that he's the image of the invisible God. John chapter 1 tells us he's the Word become flesh. And so if you really want to encounter God, if you really want to know God, go after Jesus with all your heart, and you will surely encounter the Lord. And that young man took my advice, and it's been such a blessing over the years to see him grow so close to God and see him so full of joy and seeing him use his gifts and talents for the Lord. And so if you want to know God, go after Jesus. That's why Christology is so important. The theology of Christ is so important because he really is our way, you know, the gateway in which we enter into a relationship with God, in which we come to know God and come to know our purpose. And so I love what Roland Baker says. Roland Baker says this: many people want to know what the main emphasis of the Bible is. And I believe the main emphasis of the Bible is Jesus himself. And he is reflected in his command to heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, and cast out demons. As the king, he is still the point of his kingdom. And Roland Baker goes on to say that he and Heidi, their daily goal in life is to find Jesus and seek after him and then keep finding more of him. He says this: missions is first and foremost about Jesus. And so a part of class in the future, you will enter into missiology. And Jesus was such a missionary. It was part of his nature. It's part of who he is. So when we talk about Christology, missiology just naturally comes up because that's who Jesus is. And I want us to think about, on this course, who is God? You know, who is God? Graham Twelvetree writes this in a very important paper. He says, if the line of argument of this paper is sound, in the miracles of Jesus, we have identified the interpretive key to his ministry. I want to read that again. In the miracles of Jesus, we have identified the interpretive key to his ministry. That feature, above all others, whose removal would fundamentally distort and destroy any legitimate reconstruction of the life, mission, teaching, and self-understanding of the historical Jesus. If you get rid of Jesus's healings, if you get rid of Jesus's miraculous ministry, you distort him in such a way that you can't put the historical Jesus back together again. It was such a part of his nature. And so when we talk about Christology, Graham Twelvetree reminds us, as well as Roland, that if you want to understand his life, you want to understand who he is, then his miracles is a part of that. His healing nature is a part of who he is. And so healing was essential to his identity. It was that big of a part of who he was. As you think about these truths, doesn't it seem natural that the Lord would pass on his healing ministry to his future bride, the church? And so as we think about Jesus, we think about Christology, we think about who Jesus is, and we study him, we notice in his heart of hearts, he's a healer. He's a healer. And it'd be unthinkable for us to not carry on that ministry as an act of worship unto the Lord. And so who could God be for us now that he couldn't be at any other time in history? We think about who is God. We think about how can I encounter God? How can I know God? And what is one of the names for God? Who is God? Jehovah Rapha, God our healer. And so I want to highlight in my few short moments with you the idea in Christology that Jesus is healer. Jesus is our healer. You know, Lee Jefferson is an expert on early Christian art. And he says this: in the early church and the couple of centuries beyond, he's found this phenomenon. I want to read it to you. Lee Jefferson says, in early Christian images of Jesus, the images that show Christ performing healings and miracles stand out not only in their sheer number, but also in their manner of depiction. You know, it's incredible to study early Christian art, and you think, Christology, how will they portray Jesus? How will the early church portray Jesus? How will the 2nd century, the 3rd century, the 4th century, how will they choose to display Christology in art? And they chose to display Christ as healer. Jesus, our healer, Jehovah Rapha. According to Dr. Jefferson, the early Christian viewers understood Christ as a healer and miracle worker greater than any other in an environment that included more than a few. He continues, by the late 4th century, the image of Christ healing and performing miracles had not only persisted, but increased. You know, you think about the 3rd century, you kind of expect it. The 4th century, it's just exploding. It's increasing throughout the history of the early church. And, you know, the followers of Jesus were fascinated with his ability to heal. They loved to share the character and supremacy of Christ through the medium of art. And early church historian Alan Kreider says it was a major reason why the early church grew so rapidly, because they had a theology of Christ as healer, and they brought that into their everyday life, their everyday world, the way in which they lived. You know, Lee Jefferson says this. He says, the overall theme of Christ as a dominant miracle worker was crucial enough to early Christians that it dominates the landscape of their burgeoning artistic language. And so I want to just encourage you with that thought today. Christ is healer. He wants to heal you. He wants you to use you in healing prayer to see others healed. And so remember this, in the 3rd and 4th centuries, Christian art, this phenomenon grew where Christ as healer exploded. And sadly, in the 5th century, some of that fervor and good theology gave way to relics, and you see the ministry of healing misplaced. But I just want to encourage you with this truth. Christ is healer. He is Jehovah Rapha. He's God, your healer. It's part of his fundamental nature that Graham Twelvetree would say, you cannot recreate the historical Jesus without an emphasis on his healing nature. He loves to heal. He loves you. He's for you. I encourage you, church, go heal the sick. Believe God for signs, wonders, miracles. He loves you. He's for you. And I want to encourage you on this topic of Christology. Let Jesus disciple you. He wants to be with you every day. He loves you. He wants to encourage you. He wants to build you up. He's for you. And he wants you to teach you more about himself. So God bless you. Thank you for allowing me to share.